The music was supposed to be soft that night, elegant, the kind that reminded Marines why the Marine Corps ball carried so much pride. But the sound that split the air was not music. It was the sound of my stepmother's heel hitting the polished floor as she stormed toward me. I had trained to hold my ground through gunfire, but nothing prepared me for the way she looked at me that night, like I had personally ruined her existence. I stood near the center of the ballroom in my marine dress blue, the fabric pressed so sharply it felt like armor. Ethan's hand was warm in mine, steady. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did I. Evelyn wore a long red dress that shimmered under the chandelier. It was beautiful in a way that made her cruelty even sharper. Her lips were pulled tight, the same look she used when she tried to break me as a child. The officers around us fell silent the moment she raised her voice. There were colonels, lieutenants, local officials, spouses in gowns. Everyone had come for a night of honor. Everyone turned to watch her. She called my name once, not like a mother, but like someone summoning a mistake. My stomach tightened. 8 weeks pregnant. Ethan and I had planned to share the news privately after the formal ceremony. I rested my free hand over my midsection without thinking. Evelyn's eyes caught the gesture. That was the spark. She walked faster, her heels striking the floor like gunfire. "You are not going to do this," she hissed as she reached me. Her voice sliced through the music. I felt every eye in the ballroom on my face. I wanted to walk away, but I was cornered by chandeliers and dress blues. She said things about shame, about my uniform, about how no one in the Quinn family would let this stand. I heard whispers from the tables, metal forks hitting plates. I could smell the polish on the floor. I could feel the weight of every gaze. I told her to stop. My voice cracked. She didn't stop. She stepped forward closer than anyone should have been allowed, and then everything slowed down. She kicked me, hard, right in the stomach. There was no warning, no hesitation, just the raw violence of a woman who believed she owned me. Pain exploded through my body like a wave. The chandelier above blurred. My knees buckled, and the first thing I felt was the cold tile beneath my palms. My hand slipped in something warm. It was mine. People gasped. A chair scraped against the floor. A woman screamed. Somewhere across the room, someone shouted for the MPs. Ethan fell to his knees beside me, shouting my name, but his voice came through a tunnel. My ears rang like distant artillery. The red of Evelyn's dress blurred with the blood seeping into my uniform. It was as if she had been waiting all these years to make sure the whole world saw what she could do to me. But this time, she picked the wrong place. Colonel Marcus Hayes was standing less than 20 feet away. His voice thundered through the hall. "You just assaulted a Marine. She's carrying his child." The words snapped through the air like a command. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. MPs rushed in. The music died. Evelyn's face twisted not in guilt, but in something closer to rage. She tried to speak, but no one listened to her anymore. They surrounded her. Not me. Hands lifted me off the floor. Someone pressed a cloth to my abdomen. Someone else whispered, "Stay with me, Sergeant Quinn." I looked up at the chandelier again, not because it mattered, but because it was the last still thing in a world that had turned into a storm. The last thing I saw before they rushed me out was Evelyn's face as she was forced to the ground. For the first time in my life, she looked small. I didn't know then that this night would become the turning point of everything. I only knew one thing as the stretcher wheeled me toward the ambulance. This was no longer about surviving her. This was about ending her control over me forever. If you have ever watched someone hurt the people they think they own, drop a stop sign emoji below. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that was big enough to impress the neighbors, but never once felt like home. My earliest memories of Evelyn are not of a mother's warmth, but of a woman with immaculate hair and cold blue eyes that scanned me the way a commander inspects a flaw in the ranks. My mother had died when I was 5. 2 years later, my father remarried, and Evelyn moved in with her perfect nails, perfect smile, and the belief that everything under that roof now belonged to her, including me. She never called me daughter. She called me Harper in a tone that made my name sound like something she needed to scrub off the floor. She decided what clothes I wore, what friends I was allowed to see, what extracurricular activities were acceptable. Ballet was good because it made girls graceful, she said. Martial arts was not for girls. Science club was too odd. Cheerleading made the family look good. My father never contradicted her. He was a man who loved appearances more than people. Our house smelled of lemon polish and control. Every Thanksgiving was a theater production with Evelyn as the star. She dressed her son Trevor in monogrammed sweaters and made him rehearse little speeches for the relatives. I was given a starched apron and told to smile. At 11, I was already the one refilling wine glasses and clearing dishes, while Evelyn bragged to the family about Trevor's soccer trophies. When the aunts and uncles asked about my grades, Evelyn would answer before I could straight A's. But she doesn't have Trevor's charm. She'd say it with that sweet little laugh that let people know it was safe to laugh along. That laugh was worse than any slap. One Thanksgiving when I was 15, she made me serve her guests a pumpkin pie I had baked myself, then whispered that a girl like me should be grateful just to be useful. I carried the plates while listening to her toast Trevor for being the pride of the family. My father clinked his glass and nodded as if every word was true. The humiliation burned in quiet layers over the years until it was almost part of my skin. By the time I reached high school, I had learned how to keep my achievements hidden because Evelyn had a way of making them disappear. When I was 16, I applied to several universities without telling her. Weeks passed and nothing came in the mail. One afternoon, while taking out the trash, I saw a corner of a thick envelope sticking out of the bin. It was from Clemson University. Inside the envelope, damp with coffee grounds, was a letter offering me a full scholarship. I found 2 more in the same trash can, all addressed to me. Evelyn had intercepted and thrown them away. She told me later that night, as I stood in her doorway, holding those stained envelopes, that it was for my own good. She said the world was not kind to girls like me, and that I needed to stay where I belonged. Her definition of belonging was being trapped under her thumb. My father didn't even look up from the television when I told him. He muttered something about Evelyn knowing best. That was the night I stopped believing my father would ever save me from her. The house was beautiful on the outside. White columns, a wraparound porch, an oak tree with Spanish moss dripping like lace. People thought we were the perfect Southern family. They didn't see Evelyn reading my diary, choosing my dresses, or standing in the doorway to my room, reminding me that I owed her gratitude for the roof over my head. They didn't see the way she punished me without touching me with words sharp enough to carve. She'd say no one would ever love me the way she had shaped me, and part of me believed it. By the time I was 17, the only thing I truly owned was the fire burning in my chest, the one that whispered every night that I could leave. It was small at first, just a fantasy. Then it became a plan. One December morning, I walked to the recruiter's office downtown wearing jeans and a borrowed jacket. The man behind the desk talked to me about boot camp at Paris Island. His voice was practical and direct. No one asked about my family name or how well I smiled at Thanksgiving. They cared only about whether I could commit. I signed the enlistment papers 3 days after my 17th birthday. I did it quietly. No speech, no announcement, just my signature on a line that would finally belong to me. The night before I left, Evelyn threw a party for Trevor's varsity football win. She handed me a tray of drinks, like always. I carried that tray past laughing relatives who never noticed that it was my last night in that house. My father barely looked at me when I said I'd be leaving for training in 2 days. Evelyn smiled with her teeth, but her eyes were sharp. She told me I'd be back before summer. Girls like me didn't make it in the Marines. I said nothing. I packed everything I owned into a single duffel bag. At dawn, I walked out of that house without looking back. The porch light was still on behind me. The air smelled like salt and freedom. I was done serving pie at Thanksgiving tables where I didn't belong. That morning, I boarded a bus that would take me hundreds of miles away from Evelyn's polished prison. For the first time in my life, the future belonged to me, not her. I promised myself I would never let her chain me again. That promise would become the anchor that carried me through every storm that came after. The air that hit me when I stepped off the bus at Paris Island in the summer of 20 was thick and wet like a living thing. The cicadas screamed from the trees as if they were warning us to turn around. The yellow footprints on the pavement glowed under the harsh floodlights, and for the first time in my life, I felt something like clarity. I wasn't Evelyn's burden anymore. I wasn't the girl clearing plates at a table where no one saw me. I was just Recruit Quinn, no family name, no stepmother, just a body and a will to endure. The drill instructors descended on us like a storm, their voices slicing through the humid night. Their hats were tilted low, their steps sharp and synchronized. People around me trembled. Some cried before we even reached the barracks, but as their voices roared, I felt a strange quiet inside myself. I had spent my childhood listening to Evelyn's sharp words. The screaming here didn't break me. It organized me. It gave shape to the chaos. The first weeks were a blur of sweat, sand, and obedience. Every movement had to be precise. Every step had to match the rhythm of 100 others. We woke before dawn to the sound of whistles and slammed locker doors. The first time I laced my boots in that dim barracks light, I realized I had never had a morning that belonged entirely to me. This one did. Every blister, every bruise, every drop of sweat was mine. On the third week of training, I met Jamie Torres. She was from El Paso, Texas, and she had the kind of laugh that could cut through even the worst day. We shared a rack, swapped whispered stories at night when the lights were out, and learned how to keep our heads down at the right moments. She told me about her big family and how she joined because she wanted to build something of her own. I told her nothing about Evelyn, but she understood anyway. Jamie was the first person in years who looked at me and didn't see someone to control or pity. She saw a Marine in progress. Boot camp stripped us down to nothing and rebuilt us brick by brick. Obstacle courses turned my muscles hard and steady. Endless drills carved discipline into the bones. The smell of gun oil became part of me. I ran through swamps until mud coated my skin like armor. At night, my body ached so badly it felt like it was humming, but every ache carried meaning. No one could take that from me. The real test came with the crucible. 54 hours, little sleep, even less food. A forced march under the brutal Carolina sun with full packs digging into our shoulders. Somewhere along mile 10, my legs felt like they were splitting open. My lungs burned with every breath. The girl who once served pie at Thanksgiving would have crumbled, but this version of me clenched her jaw and kept going. I could hear Jamie's voice behind me calling out my name, not as a plea, but as a challenge. We climbed walls, crawled through mud, and pulled each other over obstacles that seemed designed to break something deep inside us. At 3 a.m. during the last stretch, we reached the Reaper, the steep hill that stood between recruits and Marines. The stars above were sharp and merciless. Halfway up the hill, my vision blurred. Jamie grabbed my pack from behind and pushed. I pushed back. Step by step, we climbed. At the top, the drill instructors waited, their faces lit by red flashlights. One of them looked me straight in the eyes and nodded. Not a smile, not a speech, just a nod that said I had earned something real. When they placed the eagle globe and anchor in my palm, the metal bit into my skin, and for the first time in my life, pain felt holy. We stood there at dawn, filthy, exhausted, and transformed. Jamie squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Welcome to the family, Quinn." I cried, but not the quiet tears I used to hide in Charleston. These were loud, shaking tears. Tears of belonging. From that day forward, I wasn't just Harper Quinn. I was a United States Marine. After graduation, everything shifted. The barracks no longer felt like a cage. They felt like a base camp. We learned our specialties, were assigned units, and began to build lives shaped by our own choices. My superiors noticed how fast I learned communication systems, how steady I was under pressure. I got my first commendation 6 months later for leading my fire team through a demanding field exercise. Jamie and I celebrated with bad coffee and a stolen hour of silence by the docks. I had never felt richer in my entire life. No mansion, no silverware, just freedom. Over the years, the promotions came slowly and steadily. I wasn't the loudest Marine, but I was the one people counted on. I liked that. I liked the way respect here wasn't given because of who you were born to. It was earned. Every stripe on my sleeve was something Evelyn could never touch. She didn't even know the language of this world. She couldn't. The Marine Corps gave me discipline strength and, most of all, a family that had nothing to do with blood. Jamie was still by my side. We trained together. We laughed when we could, usually in the middle of nights that smelled like wet boots and burnt coffee. When I made sergeant, she was the first to clap me on the back and call me boss. That was the life I built 1 mile at a time, one obstacle at a time. And for years, I believed the ghosts of Charleston couldn't find me here. I was wrong. But back then, under the Carolina sun with mud on my boots and a stripe on my sleeve, I felt untouchable. It was the brightest chapter before the darkness returned. By the winter of 2025, I was 25 years old, stationed at Camp Lejeune, a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and for the first time in my life, I was genuinely happy. I had built a small, steady world for myself, one that Evelyn had nothing to do with. My days started with PT, ended with the quiet hum of the communications unit, and in between, there were hours of disciplined work that I loved. And there was Ethan. He was a fellow Marine, steady as a rock, with hands that always seemed to know when to hold and when to let go. We had met during a late-night shift, troubleshooting a comm line that refused to cooperate. We had laughed over bad coffee, and somehow quietly, we had built something solid. 8 weeks earlier, I had found out I was pregnant. The 2 pink lines on that test had scared me at first, then something else bloomed underneath the fear, something fierce and warm. It was mine. Ours, a future no one else could touch. We decided to keep it quiet until after the Marine Corps ball. The ball was our favorite time of year. It was the one night when everyone traded the smell of sweat and dust for polished brass, starched fabric, and the old weight of tradition. We planned to tell our closest friends after the ceremony. It felt like a beginning. And then the phone rang. I still remember the way the sound sliced through the calm of my barracks room. It was late November, and the light from my desk lamp cast a soft yellow glow on the wall. I looked at the screen and my stomach went cold. Evelyn Quinn. I hadn't seen her in years. I hadn't even heard her voice since I left Charleston for boot camp. I told myself I had outgrown her, but fear has a way of remembering its owner. I hesitated for a long time before answering. When I finally did, her voice spilled through the receiver like syrup over glass. Harper. She said, her tone sweet and cutting at the same time. I heard the most wonderful news. Marine Ball. Sergeant Quinn. How proud I am. The word proud sat on her tongue like a lie she'd practiced too many times. My hand tightened around the phone. I didn't ask how she knew. Evelyn always found ways to know things she shouldn't. She said she wanted to come down to Camp Lejeune to celebrate her daughter's success. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of silence, just the performance of a mother wanting to be present. I told her it wasn't necessary. She insisted. Every sentence was wrapped in sugar, but the edges were sharp. You wouldn't keep your mother away from such a special moment, would you? She asked, like she already knew the answer. I could have said no. I should have said no. But a tiny, exhausted part of me wanted to believe that maybe this time would be different. That maybe she'd look at me and see not a flaw to control, but a woman to be proud of. So I said yes. She would come. The moment I hung up, my hands were shaking. I stared at the screen long after it went dark. The barracks was quiet. Outside, winter rain tapped against the window like a clock ticking down to something I didn't want to name. Ethan found me like that, sitting on the edge of my bunk, still holding the phone. He put his hand on my shoulder and asked what was wrong. I didn't have to explain much. He knew the history, not the details, not all the rot, but enough to know Evelyn was a storm that never passed quietly. I told him she wanted to come to the ball. He said he'd be by my side the whole night. I believed him, but what I didn't say was that the worst part of Evelyn wasn't her words or even her cruelty. It was how small she could make me feel without ever raising her voice. The days leading up to the Marine Ball felt heavy. She called again 2 days later, her tone still sugary, but underneath it, I could hear the old weaponry. She said things like, I can't wait to see the look on everyone's face when they meet the perfect little Marine you've become, or I wonder how they'll feel about the real you. She didn't need to explain what she meant. She had spent years making me feel like my existence was an embarrassment she tolerated. Each call left me shaking a little more. At night, alone in my room, I found myself pressing my palm against my stomach, whispering to the tiny life inside me, promising it would never know the kind of cold that came from Evelyn's love. But promises are fragile things in the face of old wounds. One evening, as the wind rattled the barracks windows, she called again. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, another call, then a text, then another call. Her persistence crawled under my skin the way it used to when I was a teenager, when she'd stand outside my locked bedroom door, repeating my name like a curse. I finally answered. She told me she was already planning her dress, that she couldn't wait to meet Ethan, that this was our moment as a family. That word family felt like a hand closing around my throat. After I hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the blank wall, and whispered to the quiet, "Why is it never over with her?" I wanted to believe that the life I built here was strong enough to keep her out, but she had always known how to find the cracks. This time, I promised myself she would not win, but promises, even strong ones, are different from battles, and I could already feel the war building in the silence between rings. The night of the Marine Corps ball felt like it had been dipped in gold. Every surface gleamed. The polished marble floor reflected the chandelier light like a sheet of water. Dress blues and gowns swept through the entrance hall in a slow, dignified current. The air smelled of cologne champagne and starch. This was the night Marines waited for all year, the one night where the sweat and grit of the base gave way to elegance and ceremony. I stood near the entrance with Ethan's hand in mine, his thumb rubbing slow circles over my knuckles. My dress blue uniform was crisp, the brass buttons polished until they could catch light like stars. I smiled when people passed, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was supposed to be our night, our announcement, our beginning. Ethan leaned in close and whispered, "You look incredible." His breath warmed the side of my neck, and for a moment I believed him, but the moment cracked as soon as I saw her. Evelyn Quinn walked through the wide entrance of the ballroom like she owned the place. She wore a deep red gown that caught the chandelier light with every step. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was not. It was the same smile she used when she told me I was an embarrassment as a child, except tonight it was sharper. She looked around the room with the air of a woman arriving at a coronation. When her eyes landed on me, the smile disappeared. It was replaced by something cold and familiar. She didn't belong in this world. She wasn't military. She wasn't invited. She was here because she wanted to remind me that no matter how far I'd come, she could still reach me. Ethan felt my body stiffen. He followed my gaze, saw her, and tightened his grip on my hand. "Harper," he whispered, a warning and a promise, all in one. I drew a slow breath, lifted my chin, and told myself that I could ignore her. I had earned this night, but Evelyn had never been the kind of woman to stay on the edges. She walked straight through the crowd, her red dress slicing through the sea of blues and black tuxedos. I could feel people noticing her. She had that effect. Heads turned, conversations faltered. She stopped right in front of me, too close, close enough for me to smell the expensive perfume that always made me think of closed doors and whispered insults. "Harper," she said sweetly, but her eyes were like blades. "Look at you, playing soldier, playing perfect." I tried to step back to create distance, but she matched me. "Evelyn," I said evenly, "this is not the place." She tilted her head, pretending to be confused, and raised her voice just enough for the people near us to hear. "Not the place. Oh, sweetheart, this is exactly the place. Everyone should know the truth." My stomach tightened. My hand unconsciously moved toward my midsection. That was the mistake. Her eyes flicked down, and she saw it. The smirk that spread across her face was one I had known since I was 7. "Oh," she said softly, like a predator finding a weak spot. "So it's true." Her voice grew louder. "You're parading around here dressed in that uniform, carrying a child. You've brought shame to the Quinn family." The conversations around us began to still. People glanced over their shoulders. I saw Jamie across the room, her smile fading as she started moving toward us. Evelyn took another step forward, closing the space between us. I could see the faint shimmer of champagne on her lips. "Do you think this makes you special?" she hissed. You're a disgrace. Ethan stepped between us, his posture calm but unyielding. Ma'am, you need to step back. Evelyn laughed. And who are you? The father. How touching. Her words dripped poison. I wanted to turn and leave. I wanted to drag Ethan to the dance floor and disappear into the music, but she stepped around him like he was nothing. I could see Colonel Marcus Hayes standing not far from the podium, watching closely, his jaw tightening. Evelyn raised her voice again, loud enough now that everyone in the surrounding tables could hear. You think wearing a uniform erases what you are? You think being pregnant out of wedlock makes you a hero? You're nothing. You always were nothing. Her words sliced through me, but it wasn't the way they used to when I was a teenager. This time it was humiliation that burned, not fear. Humiliation because I knew everyone was listening. The music softened. The crowd shifted uneasily. Marines and spouses and officers with their ribbons and medals all turned to watch. She wanted this. She wanted to humiliate me where she thought I felt strongest. I whispered to Ethan, "Let's go." We started to step away. That was when it happened. Evelyn lunged forward. She didn't shout. She didn't warn. She lifted her leg and drove her foot into my stomach with a force that knocked the breath out of me. The world tilted sideways. Pain exploded through my body, a blinding wave that stole my breath. I heard someone scream. My knees gave way and I crashed to the marble floor. For a second, all I saw was the chandelier above spinning slowly. Then I felt it, warmth spreading across my abdomen down through the fabric of my uniform. A dark stain began to bloom against the pristine white of my belt. I heard Ethan shout my name. I heard Jamie somewhere yelling for the MPs. I heard the music cut off. Evelyn stood over me with her hand over her mouth, not in shock, but in a mockery of it. She wanted to look like the victim now. That was always her trick. But the room wasn't hers anymore. Colonel Hayes's voice thundered across the ballroom. You just assaulted a Marine. She's carrying his child. The entire hall froze. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breath and the thud of MP's boots as they rushed toward her. Hands lifted me gently from the floor, but the room was a blur, faces smeared together by the haze of pain. Evelyn tried to speak, tried to twist the story even then, but Colonel Hayes's voice cut through everything again, louder, sharper. Take her out of here. Now. MPs grabbed her by the arms. She didn't look so elegant then. Her red dress crumpled as they held her, her face twisted not with guilt, but with rage that her performance had failed. Ethan's face appeared above mine, pale and terrified. I tried to say something, but my throat was raw. The blood kept coming, soaking through the layers of fabric warm against the cold marble. My head lolled to the side. I saw Jamie kneeling nearby, her eyes bright with panic. I saw the colonel's polished shoes steady like the foundation of the building itself. The chandeliers blurred, the ceiling swam. Someone pressed a cloth to my abdomen. Someone else kept saying my name. Sergeant Quinn, stay with us. The sounds began to stretch and warp until they felt far away. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed everything was Evelyn being dragged away in her perfect red gown, her face caught in a snarl. For the first time, she was the one being watched by everyone. For the first time, she was the one exposed. If you have ever been humiliated in public by someone who claimed to love you, type, I see you below. When I opened my eyes, the world was white, not clean. White, not peaceful white, but the kind of sterile brightness that buzzed in your ears and made everything else feel far away. The rhythmic beeping of a monitor pulled me fully back. Naval Medical Center Camp Lejeune. I didn't need anyone to tell me where I was. The smell of antiseptic, the stiff hospital sheets, the distant squeak of shoes on linoleum, it was all burned into my memory from the handful of times I'd accompanied injured Marines here, but this time I was the one in the bed. My stomach ached in a way I had never known, deep and raw and hollow. When the nurse walked in, her face softened when she saw I was awake. She didn't say the words right away. She didn't have to. I knew before she opened her mouth. She told me gently that the pregnancy hadn't survived the trauma. Just like that. 8 weeks of hope gone erased in one violent moment. I stared at the ceiling while she spoke, watching how the fluorescent light hummed like it didn't care. I didn't cry at first. The pain sat too deep for tears. When the nurse left, I pressed my palm against my abdomen, the place where I had whispered promises late at night. There was nothing there now, just the echo of something I couldn't get back. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't a nurse. It was a uniform. A young MP, his posture rigid. He informed me in a flat voice that Evelyn Quinn was in custody charged with assaulting a Marine on active duty and endangering a pregnancy. The words didn't register at first. Evelyn. Custody. Charged. It felt surreal. This was the woman who had always gotten away with everything. The woman whose cruelty never left a bruise anyone else could see. And now she was behind bars. I expected satisfaction. What I felt was a quiet, cold clarity. She had taken something from me that I could never get back. The old pain from Charleston didn't just return that night. It wrapped around me like barbed wire. I saw her face on Thanksgiving night smiling as I served pie. I saw the letters she threw away. I saw the way she told me no one would ever love me. I saw the years she made me believe that escaping her was impossible. And now, even here, even after I had built a life she could not touch, she had reached into it and destroyed something good. I lay in that bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything she had ever done. Somewhere along the way, the grief turned into something sharper. Not rage. Rage burns too hot and fast. This was colder, steady, controlled. She had taken enough. She wasn't going to walk away from this, not this time. The door opened again, and this time it was Captain Riley Moore, a JAG officer. I had seen her on base before, but never spoken to her. She carried herself like someone who had spent years walking into rooms where people underestimated her and leaving with their assumptions shattered. She stepped into the room with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to be loud. She introduced herself, pulled up a chair, and sat down. "Sergeant Quinn," she said, voice low and calm. "I'm here because this isn't just a family matter. This is a felony assault against a United States Marine. And we're not going to let her disappear from this." I nodded but didn't trust my voice yet. She didn't press. She gave me space to breathe. She laid out the basics of the charges. Assaulting an active duty service member is a serious federal offense. Assaulting a pregnant woman adds another layer. And the fact that it happened on base in front of witnesses meant this wasn't going away quietly. Evelyn had made her move in the one place where her charm and lies couldn't protect her. Riley's voice was even professional, but her eyes carried something fierce. She told me the base commander had already authorized full cooperation with civilian law enforcement, that the Marines would pursue charges, that I didn't have to stand alone in this. Something shifted inside me when she said that. All my life, Evelyn's power had come from isolation. She made me feel alone, unseen, unheard. But here, I wasn't alone. The institution I had chosen, the uniform I had earned, stood behind me. Riley leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I need everything," she said. "Every call, every message, anything you have that can establish a pattern of harassment or threats." I hesitated for a heartbeat. Then I reached for the phone on the nightstand. Weeks of saved voicemails, snide remarks wrapped in sugar, the voice of a woman who thought she would always have control. I opened the app and pressed play on one of the recordings. Evelyn's voice filled the room. "You think this uniform makes you someone?" "You're still mine, Harper. You always will be." Riley didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is exactly what we need." She took notes, meticulous and fast. I told her about the calls, the texts, the way Evelyn had wormed her way back into my life. For the first time, instead of feeling like I was confessing weakness, it felt like I was assembling ammunition. Information is power. Evelyn had taught me that lesson cruelly. I was going to use it against her. Riley explained how the process would work. Evelyn would face both civilian and military consequences. Because the assault happened on base, the military had jurisdiction. The civilian court would pursue the criminal case. The Marine Corps would support it with testimony from Colonel Hayes MP's witnesses and my own statement. Riley said something that stuck to my ribs like iron. "This is not your shame to carry, Sergeant. It's her crime to pay for." I swallowed hard. My throat ached, but my voice finally came back. "She's done this my whole life," I whispered. "She's hurt me my whole life." Riley's gaze held mine. "Then it ends now." That night, after she left, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything Evelyn had ever done to me. All the times I let it slide because I thought fighting her was hopeless. All the times I thought escaping her meant disappearing. I was done disappearing. I opened my phone again and started organizing everything. Every message, every voicemail, every scrap of evidence that showed the world exactly who Evelyn Quinn really was. I didn't shake this time. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper promises to the dark. I built my case. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back the power she stole from me, piece by piece. I was a Marine, and this time the battlefield was the law. I moved through the days after the hospital like a soldier on a quiet mission, every action deliberate, every moment measured. Captain Riley Moore taught me how to turn grief into procedure and procedure into protection, and I learned fast because I had been taught my whole life to survive by any means necessary. Riley arranged meetings in rooms with no windows, places where paper and signatures and official stamps could put fences around Evelyn's chaos. We met with the MPs first in a crowded little office that smelled of old coffee and toner, and Sergeant Alvarez slid a stack of initial reports across the table and said in a voice that did not need to be loud that they had secured body cam footage from the MPs who responded at the ballroom and that Colonel Hayes had already given a formal statement to the Provost Marshal. That detail gave me a lightness. Like sunlight pushing through clouds, my command had not only seen what happened, they were willing to stand with me publicly. Riley explained how the military and civilian processes would run in parallel, how evidence would need to be preserved with meticulous care, how we would demand chain of custody for every recording, every photograph, every witness statement. She talked about subpoenas and discovery, and how the courtroom was less a place of grand speeches and more a machine that chewed through stories until what remained was fact. I listened and took notes, feeling for the first time in weeks like something important was being assembled that I had a stake in. The first thing we did was catalog every message Evelyn had sent over the last year. My phone had become a repository of small cruelties. Voicemails that began with a soft faux concern and ended with a barb texts that praised and then undermined invitations that became warnings. Riley taught me to date every file timestamp each voicemail and transcribe them in full, choosing words carefully so an attorney or judge could not argue about tone later. Jamie and Ethan sat with me for long hours as we listened to recordings I had saved on a whim in the hush of night, and their faces shifted in real time, from supportive to stunned as they heard Evelyn's voice saying things that would later be read in court as threats and manipulations. We made copies, backed them up, burned them to CD. Because Riley said redundant formats helped if servers got compromised, and we printed transcriptions in double columns so the language of her cruelty could be scanned quickly. It felt bureaucratic and surgical, and it was exactly what I needed. Riley also helped me draft the initial protection paperwork. It was a strange relief to sit in a room and tell someone the truth on record without feeling like I needed to preface it with apology. The temporary restraining order filed that week did two things. It forced Evelyn to be physically removed from any proximity to me, and it gave legal teeth to the idea that her behavior required formal consequence. When MPs served the order, I watched her face as if I were reading Braille. She looked small in that moment, the grandeur of her red dresses and rehearsed smiles stripped away. But the legal world is not content with a single moment of exposure. Riley pressed us to think about pattern. One assault could be framed as an aberration. A pattern showed intent. So we went back through the years. I dug up the letters, the college acceptance envelopes I had found in the trash at 17, the old photographs where Evelyn had staged my expressions next to Trevor's smiles in a way that made me a backdrop. Jamie testified about the way Evelyn tried to isolate me when I had to leave home. Ethan added context about Evelyn's behavior at base events and the calls she made to the barracks, and a neighbor from Charleston provided a sworn statement about Evelyn's habit of reading my private mail under the guise of housekeeping. Each affidavit was another brick. The civilian counsel Riley coordinated with was precise and unflinching. She found a local prosecutor who had handled domestic harassment and public assault cases and whose office had a reputation for taking on the type of entitled defendant who believed rules were for other people. The prosecutor wanted to see how the public event had increased the gravity of the assault, and Riley made it clear that the fact that the attack happened at the Marine Ball in uniform with witnesses made it more than a family quarrel. We worked on witness lists. Who had seen the moment exactly? Who had heard Evelyn's voice rising? Who had watched the moment she closed the distance between us? Colonel Hayes signed an affidavit that detailed his observation and his decision to order the MPs to act immediately. His support was not theatrical. It was the kind of steady affirmation that makes a courthouse take notice. He wrote that in his 30 years of service, he had rarely seen such a brazen attack in a ceremony setting, and that his duty compelled him to protect his Marines, pregnant or not, from violence in any form. That statement alone reverberated through our legal strategy like a bell. Meanwhile, I learned the art of the interview. Riley and a civilian investigator coached me on how to respond to questions about my past without letting Evelyn's manipulations provoke me. They taught me to turn emotion into evidence, to describe the pattern without drama, to offer dates, to supply copies of messages, to point to witnesses. There is a clinical kind of courage required to tell a long story that has been your life and to do it in pieces under oath. I practiced in front of a mirror in the barracks at night. I practiced the line about how Evelyn's hand felt when the boot hit my stomach, because the phrase was simple and true and would not give the defense easy angles to claim exaggeration. Jamie and Ethan became indispensable. They wrote statements about Evelyn's behavior at previous base events, about the way she would linger for interviews and try to charm people into forgetting the small cruelties she committed in private. They both signed affidavits, and Ethan's handwriting on his signature felt steady and final, like mortar between the bricks I had been laying. We also sought corroboration beyond the people who already loved me. A civilian staffer who worked the event remembered the exact time when the music stopped and said she had taken a photo from the doorway as MPs led Evelyn away. A local news reporter who had been covering a piece on the Marine Ball shared a copy of the raw footage he had taken for a piece that never aired. In that footage, you could see Evelyn's approach my trying to step away and the moment the kick landed. Riley worked with the prosecutor to obtain warrants for any additional footage from the venue, and confirmed that the provost marshal's office would share their incident reports. The logistics of evidence collection were messy and relentless, but it was also oddly comforting. I had spent years being told to hide the truth. Now the truth was being asked for, and every time I handed over a file, a transcript, or a recorded voicemail, I felt less like someone apologizing for her own life and more like someone reclaiming it. We created a timeline, a granular map of Evelyn's contact history with me over the months leading up to the ball and over the years before. Each call was dated. Each voicemail was transcribed. Each text was saved. We highlighted the moments where Evelyn's tone shifted from faux concern to direct threat. When we presented the timeline to the prosecutor, her eyes narrowed at the sweep of it the way isolation and control revealed themselves in regular intervals. She asked for more. Riley gave it to her. She asked for witnesses to be prepped to testify about demeanor. We rehearsed deposition scenarios where Evelyn's defense might try to paint me as unstable. We ironed out how to counter such claims with objective material, the recordings, the discarded acceptance letters, the neighbor's testimony. While all this lawyering happened, I still had to be a sergeant. I still led my team, ran drills, and fixed comms lines. There was a discipline to balancing an active career and an unfolding legal matter. Some days I felt like I was walking a tightrope. The seam between private pain and public duty taut under my boots, but every time I checked a radio net or supervised an exercise, it helped me remember why I had enlisted in the first place, to be part of something that held to higher standards. Those moments of normality were anchors. Still at night, when the barracks hummed and my bunk was a small island of dim light, I would stand in front of the full-length mirror and look at the faint scar that had started forming where the kick had landed the bruise. A pale bruise now, but a permanent mark nonetheless. I would trace it lightly with a fingertip and think about the woman I had been before the Marines and the woman I was becoming because of them. One night, I drew in a breath and said out loud to a face that had grown stranger and stronger, "No more fear." The words landed in the quiet room like a promise and not a plea, and for the first time since the hospital bed, I meant them without reservation. The day of the hearing at the joint court between the military tribunal and the state of North Carolina carried a weight unlike any other day of my life. I had faced drill instructors screaming inches from my face. I had climbed the Reaper with bleeding hands, but walking into that courtroom in my Service Alpha uniform was something different. It wasn't fear. It was a controlled fire burning low and steady in my chest. The courtroom was split in two energies that never quite mixed the rigid precision of military protocol and the polished theater of civilian law. Marines in uniform lined one side of the gallery, civilians in dark suits on the other. The flag hung behind the judge's bench, the sunlight spilling through tall windows, catching on the gold cords. I walked in with my shoulders back ribbons, aligned my cover tucked under my arm. Ethan and Jamie were already seated behind me. Colonel Hayes stood like a solid wall in the front row. Evelyn was on the opposite side of the room in a tailored beige suit, the red of her gown long gone, replaced by a costume designed to make her look soft and harmless. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her hands rested in her lap. She had always been good at playing roles, and now she was playing the one she thought would save her, the wounded, misunderstood mother. Her attorney, a civilian defense lawyer with slick hair and too much confidence, whispered something in her ear. She nodded slowly, eyes wide and rehearsed. But beneath that makeup, I saw the glint I had known all my life, the cold calculation that said she still believed she could win. The judge called the court to order, and the air settled into something heavy and deliberate. The prosecutor outlined the charges: assaulting an active-duty Marine, assaulting a pregnant woman, committing a violent act on a federal military installation, causing the loss of a pregnancy, and intent to harm. Her voice didn't waver. She laid out every count with clinical precision. Evelyn's attorney countered with his opening statement, weaving a story about a mother who had come to a military ball to support her daughter. A woman who had been overwhelmed by emotion, a tragic misunderstanding. He called it a family matter that had gotten out of hand. I didn't flinch, because the truth was not in their words. It was in the evidence. When they called me to the stand, I rose, adjusted my jacket, and walked with the steadiness the Corps had drilled into me from day one. The oath didn't feel foreign. It felt like another promise I was ready to keep. I sat in the witness chair, hands on my lap, eyes level with the prosecutor. The first thing she asked me was simple to describe the relationship with Evelyn Quinn. I didn't paint her as a monster. I didn't have to. I laid out the facts: years of control, intercepted letters, humiliation dressed as parenting, the phone calls leading up to the Marine ball. I kept my voice calm even when my stomach knotted. Then came the moment Riley had prepared me for. She nodded to the tech operator at the table. The courtroom filled with the sound of Evelyn's voice. It wasn't angry. That was the most chilling part. Her voice was smooth, measured, the way she always sounded when she was about to hurt me. "You think this uniform makes you someone?" The recording hissed through the speakers. "You're still mine, Harper. You always will be." I didn't look at Evelyn, but I felt the shift in the room. Marines are trained to hear tone. The lawyers heard it too. The courtroom stopped breathing for a moment. Another recording followed, her voice again, this time sharper. "I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget. You think you can shame me, I'll remind you who you are." Her attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled. The evidence was admissible. Each recording landed like a nail being driven. The prosecutor asked about the night of the Marine ball. I told them everything: the red dress, the perfume, the words in front of everyone, the way she kicked, how the floor had felt cold against my back, how I had heard Colonel Hayes roar, "You just assaulted a Marine. She's carrying his child." My voice stayed even. That steadiness was its own kind of blade. Evelyn's attorney tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He asked about my past, about my relationship with her, about my emotions. He wanted me to look unhinged, emotional, the unstable daughter of a loving but misunderstood woman. But Riley's preparation paid off. Every question had an answer rooted in fact. I spoke softly, clearly. I let her own words hang in the air. When he tried to suggest that Evelyn had simply lost control in a moment of overwhelming emotion, the prosecutor stepped forward and played the third recording. Evelyn's voice was cold as winter. "I can't wait to see their faces when they learn the truth. You'll wish you never put on that uniform." The jurors looked down at the transcripts. They didn't need anyone to tell them what that meant. Then came the witnesses. Ethan walked to the stand, his own uniform immaculate, his eyes steady. He described the moment he saw Evelyn's foot connect with my stomach. He described the panic, the blood, the way she smirked before trying to act shocked. Jamie followed, describing Evelyn's presence in the room, the way she targeted me, how the crowd had fallen silent when she spoke. Then Colonel Marcus Hayes took the stand. His presence was a storm front. He had the kind of authority that fills a room without raising its voice. He stated simply and without embellishment that he had witnessed a civilian assault a pregnant Marine in a ceremonial setting and that he had acted in accordance with his duty to protect his people. He spoke like he was reading from a law book, clear and deliberate, but it carried the weight of command. He looked at Evelyn once, just once, and I saw her shift in her seat for the first time. The defense called her to testify. She walked to the stand, hands folded like a saint, her voice soft, trembling at the edges. She spoke of love, of fear for her daughter, of a misunderstanding. She said she had been emotional, that she had only meant to talk to me, that everything had spiraled out of control. It might have convinced someone who didn't know her, but then the prosecutor leaned in and asked about the recordings. She said she didn't remember saying those things. They played them again. Her face tightened just for a second, but the jurors saw it. That small fracture was all it took. Closing arguments came and went. The judge instructed the jury. The courtroom held its breath. It didn't take long. When they returned, the verdict was clear, guilty on all counts. Evelyn Quinn had been found guilty of aggravated assault, assaulting a Marine on active duty, and causing injury to a pregnant woman, resulting in the loss of the pregnancy. The judge's words were precise, stripped of sentiment. Sentencing would follow, but in that moment, a lifetime of control cracked. Evelyn sat there, the performance slipping, the smile gone. She wasn't the towering figure from my childhood anymore. She was just a woman who believed she was untouchable and learned she was not. I walked out of that courtroom not with a smile, but with the quiet kind of triumph that doesn't need applause. It was the kind of victory you feel in your bones. If you believe the truth should be shouted in public, leave a below. 3 months after the verdict, life in Jacksonville, North Carolina had taken on a steady, quiet rhythm that I didn't trust at first. The kind of silence that follows a storm can feel like another threat if you've spent your life waiting for the next strike. I still woke up before dawn, out of habit laced my boots, and drank bitter coffee in the dark kitchen before the world around me stirred. I spent my days between the base paperwork and rebuilding what Evelyn had tried to burn down. The legal process had stripped her of the image she had carefully crafted for decades. News of the case had rippled through Charleston's upper circles, through military families who had attended the ball, through every corner she once ruled with her perfectly rehearsed smile. She was no longer Evelyn the socialite or Evelyn the untouchable matriarch. She was Evelyn Quinn, a convicted felon. A judge had handed down her sentence, probation, and mandatory counseling restitution payments, a permanent restraining order, and the civil suit had cost her nearly everything she owned. She had tried to drag the proceedings out, but her own arrogance had left her little to stand on. She had underestimated what it meant to attack a Marine on base in front of witnesses on camera. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the rain had finally stopped. But people like Evelyn don't disappear quietly. They come back. It was a cold, wet evening when I heard the knock at my door. I lived in a modest ground-floor apartment near the main road, a place chosen for its quiet and its distance from Charleston. Rain was coming down in sheets, tapping against the windows like restless fingers. I almost didn't open the door. I thought it might be a delivery or a neighbor, but when I looked through the peephole, my breath froze. It was her. Evelyn stood on the porch with rain dripping down the edges of a beige trench coat, her hair damp, her face carefully arranged into something soft and wounded. For a moment, it felt like I was 17 again, standing at the top of the stairs in Charleston watching her smile as she took something else from me, But this time was different. I opened the door, but only halfway, the chain still hooked. The wind pushed rain in around her, dampening the welcome mat. She gave a small, practiced smile. "Harper," she said softly as if nothing had happened. "I just wanted to talk." Her voice still carried that sweet edge she used to cut me with, but there was something underneath it now. Desperation. I said nothing. I waited. She shifted rain splattering against her coat. "I'm not the same woman I was," she began. "I know I've made mistakes. But I'm getting older. I'm not well, and I don't want to leave this world with things between us unfinished." She lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. "I want to make things right." I stared at her, and for a long, silent moment I thought about the years she had stolen, about the baby she had taken, about the way she had humiliated me in front of an entire ballroom and tried to paint herself as a victim, about the times she had made me feel like I belonged to her, like my existence was a favor she granted. She took a small step closer to the door, and I saw the way the rain soaked into her hair, flattening the polished image she tried to maintain. "Harper," she whispered, "please, I'm still your mother." The word landed like a slap. Mother. She had used it all my life like a weapon, something to remind me of a debt I never owed. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel the satisfaction I thought I might. I felt clarity. Cold and clean. I undid the chain slowly and opened the door fully, not to invite her in, but so she could see my face clearly. I stepped forward until the rain hit my boots. Her eyes searched mine, waiting for the weak spot she used to exploit. I didn't give her one. "You're not my mother," I said evenly. Her face twitched just a fraction. "You never were." She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. She started to cry then, or at least make the sound of crying. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked in all the right places. She talked about her age, about wanting forgiveness, about being scared of dying alone. She said things like, "We're still family and I've paid enough." But all I heard were the echoes of every time she had cornered me in a hallway, every time she had made me feel small, every time she had reminded me that in her world I would never belong. She wiped at her eyes and whispered, "Please, Harper, let me see you. Just talk to me. We can fix this." I took a slow breath and let the rain soak the silence between us. For the first time in my life, I said, voice low and steady, "No." Her eyes widened, not in surprise, but in disbelief. It was the same look she used to give me when I dared to push back. She took another step forward, but the threshold between us held like a line carved in stone. "You'll regret this," she whispered, the old steel slipping through the cracks in her soft performance. "No," I replied. "I already regretted everything I let you do. This is the only thing I won't." I closed the door slowly without slamming it, without shouting. Just the quiet, solid sound of wood meeting frame. I stood there with my hand on the lock while the rain kept falling on the other side. I could hear her footsteps retreating uneven and small. That was the last time I saw Evelyn Quinn in person. In the weeks that followed, the court finalized the permanent restraining order. She was barred from contacting me by any means. Her assets, already bleeding from the civil suit, were seized to fulfill restitution payments and additional penalties from unpaid legal fees. Her house in Charleston went up for sale. The perfect facade she had built for decades crumbled one legal notice at a time. Word spread quickly in her circles. Invitations dried up, doors closed. People who once smiled at her from cocktail tables whispered about the night she kicked her pregnant stepdaughter at a Marine ball. The world she had ruled shrank to the size of the mistakes she had made. I didn't follow her story after that. I didn't need to. The courtroom had done what I never could as a child. It had stripped her of power. And when she came to my door, trying to borrow forgiveness, I had given her the only thing she had never been able to take from me before my refusal. The rain kept falling that night, long after she left, but for the first time in my life, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like freedom. When I finally left Camp Lejeune, it was early autumn, the air still warm enough to stick to your skin, but carrying that faint whisper of winter on the edges. My last day on base was quiet. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic goodbyes. Just the solid clap of Jamie's hand on my shoulder. Ethan's steady nod, and the familiar sound of boots on asphalt. The world that had shaped me, broken me, and remade me faded in the rearview mirror as I drove north toward a life no one else would define for me again. Portland, Maine wasn't a place I chose because of a plan. It was a place that felt like an inhale after years of holding my breath. The coast stretched out cold and gray. The streets smelled like salt and fresh bread, and the old brick buildings wore their history without pretending to be something they weren't. I found a small corner space in a quiet neighborhood near a community of veterans. It used to be a bookshop, then a bakery, and now, slowly, it was becoming mine. The sign above the door wasn't fancy, just Harper's. No slogans, no frills, just my name, the one Evelyn used to say, like a curse, now carved into wood, like a promise. I painted the walls myself. I learned how to repair an old espresso machine that hissed like a dragon every morning. I stocked the shelves with jars of coffee beans and a small section of dog treats because I had finally let myself bring home the one thing I had always wanted as a child, a dog. His name was Scout, a wiry little mutt with more attitude than size. He followed me everywhere, his nails clicking softly on the wooden floors as if reminding me I was not alone. The customers came slowly at first, a few older veterans from the neighborhood people who recognized the way I stood when I was at ease, shoulders squared, boots, firm eyes, scanning but not afraid. They sat at the tables with their coffee and their quiet the way people do when they've lived through things that don't need to be spoken. I didn't tell them my story. They didn't ask. It was enough that we shared the silence. The days passed without any shouting, without the sharp edge of someone else's control slicing through the air. No one told me how to dress. No one told me I was an embarrassment. I didn't check my phone for Evelyn's voice anymore. The restraining order was more than a piece of paper. It was a door that could no longer be forced open. In the winter, the first snowfall came early. I woke to the sound of snow sliding off the roof and the soft weight of it settling on the world. Scout barked once, then curled against my feet while I brewed the first pot of coffee. The shop opened at 7, but I always came down earlier. There was something about the stillness before the day began that I had never allowed myself to feel. I stepped outside onto the porch with my mug, the steam curling into the sharp air. The street was quiet. A few cars hummed in the distance. The world felt wide and small at the same time, like it finally fit. The snow fell gently, each flake catching the faint orange glow of the streetlights, and I stood there with the warmth of the coffee seeping into my hands, breathing air that didn't belong to anyone else. No shouting, no humiliation, no boots stomping down a hallway to remind me where I stood. Just the snow, the steam, and Scout nudging my leg like he was making sure I was still there. I tilted my head back and watched the flakes melt against my skin. "This is mine," I whispered to the cold morning, the words soft but steady. Finally. The wind carried the words away, but I didn't need anyone to hear them. I just needed to say them out loud to remind myself that this quiet life wasn't a dream I would wake up from. It was real. It was earned. Sometimes when the shop was empty and the smell of roasted beans filled the air, my mind drifted back to that night at the Marine Ball. Not the moment on this floor, not the blood, not Evelyn's snarl, but the moment after. The silence after Colonel Hayes's voice cut through everything. The way the room shifted. The way I realized that the power she had held over me my whole life had ended in front of everyone. For years that memory had felt like a wound. Now it felt like a line in the sand. The moment everything broke. The moment everything began. I could almost see that chandelier light again, could almost hear the murmur of the crowd, but instead of the terror that used to follow, I felt something else. A small, unshakable smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. Scout would lift his head as if noticing, and I'd ruffle his fur, grateful for something simple and warm. On Saturdays, Jamie called from wherever she was stationed, telling me stories that smelled like the core sand, sweat, and stubbornness. Sometimes Ethan joined, sometimes not. Our lives had branched in different directions, but they were rooted in the same ground. Colonel Hayes had sent me a short note after the sentencing. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't emotional. It said, "Marines protect Marines. Always." It sat framed on a shelf next to the espresso machine. On certain mornings I looked at it and remembered who stood up when Evelyn tried to tear me down. The woman I had been back then would have been shocked by the quiet of this life. She would have been looking over her shoulder, waiting for the knock on the door, waiting for the next cruel twist of Evelyn's smile. But that woman didn't live here anymore. The one standing on the porch, wrapped in a sweater with a dog at her feet and coffee in her hand, belonged entirely to herself. The snow fell harder as the morning stretched on. Customers started coming in their boots, tracking wet footprints across the floor, their laughter rising in gentle bursts. I wiped down the counter and poured coffee, moving through the motions with a steadiness that had nothing to do with orders or fear. It was the steadiness of someone who had fought her war and walked out whole. In the evening, when the lights dimmed and the sign flipped to closed, I sometimes stood at the window and let the night press in around me. I thought of Charleston sometimes, not with anger, but with a strange kind of distance. That house, those people, that version of me, they were ghosts now. They couldn't follow me here. Evelyn's name belonged to court documents and the past. My name belonged to the sign on the shop door and the sound of Scout snoring on the couch. It took years to understand that freedom doesn't always come with a roar. Sometimes it comes with a soft snowfall and a cup of coffee in your hands, with silence that doesn't scare you anymore. One morning, as the sun climbed over the roofs and painted the snow pale gold, I stepped outside and whispered again to the cold, "This is mine." Finally. And this time, I didn't just say it. I believed it all the way down to my bones. I want to end this story the way it truly ends. Not with the sound of a courtroom gavel or the last snowfall on the porch of my little coffee shop, but with a truth that took me years to believe. If you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to love you, I see you. You are not alone. I know what it feels like to grow up believing that pain is just something you have to live with because it comes from people who share your roof, your last name, your blood. I know what it feels like to be told that silence is safer, that speaking up will only make it worse. I know what it's like to think you have no way out. But you do. I did. And it changed everything. For a long time, Evelyn made me believe she was bigger than me, bigger than the world, that her control over my life was permanent. But here's the thing about people who build their power on cruelty and control. It only lasts as long as you believe it belongs to them. The moment you take it back, they crumble. They may rage. They may try to come back. But they can never hold you the same way again. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a courtroom full of people finally hearing the truth. Sometimes it's the sound of a door closing on someone who thought they could walk through it forever. And sometimes it's a whisper on a snowy morning saying, "This is mine. Finally." If my story has found its way to you, maybe it's because you've walked through your own version of Evelyn's shadow. Maybe you've been humiliated, silenced, dismissed, or told to forgive someone who never earned it. I want you to know this. Your pain is real and your voice matters. You have the right to tell your story. You have the right to stand tall in it. You have the right to claim the life that belongs to you. So if you've ever carried that kind of hurt, if you've ever had to look into the face of someone who was supposed to protect you and instead found cruelty, drop a comment below. Share your story if you're ready. If not, just type, "I see you." Those 3 words are enough to remind someone else they aren't invisible. And if you believe justice should be public, if you believe that people like Evelyn should not get to keep their power hidden behind closed doors, hit that like button. Every click, every comment, every shared story makes the silence a little less heavy for someone out there who hasn't spoken yet. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Not just stories about pain, but about the way pain can be met with strength, the way justice can rise in places people least expect it. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever had their voice stolen. It's for anyone still standing at the edge of a storm wondering if they can survive it. You can. And when you walk out the other side, your voice will be yours again. This is my life now. A quiet coffee shop in Portland. A stubborn dog named Scout. The sound of snow against the window. No more shouting. No more fear. And the space to tell the truth out loud to anyone who needs to hear it. If this reaches just one person who needs to know that freedom is possible, then telling it is worth it. So here's my final word to you tonight. You matter. Your story matters, and you are not alone.